Hey, Liron here. Today is going to be a quick painting tutorial on how to get the paint to do the work for you. This is super basic, super beginner, but everyone, myself included, always forgets about this. So I have a couple of painting examples we'll look at in a second about how this applies to an actual full painting. But before we do that, I'd like to do a quick demo. So the idea about making the paint do the work is using flow, because that's the one characteristic of watercolor that it has that is super unique, okay? It's what makes it so special, and it's what allows you to create paintings that are beautiful. And the way to do that is with water. So for an extreme example, we're gonna just add some water here. Water is a little muddy from my last painting, so I'm adding a bit of water. Now, if I want to get flow, I'm going to put my paint right next to the water. I know it's super basic, but I'll show you in a couple of seconds how myself included, everyone forgets about this, even when you are at the heart of making a painting. Sometimes you narrow in so much on details and painting details, like small details, very accurately, that you kind of forget that watercolor has this magic called flow. So there are a couple of ways of achieving this flow. First, like I just showed you, you put some water on paper and then you come back with some paint and you kind of let the paint be moved by the water. One more thing you can do is first put the paint down on paper and then come back with water, and wherever you wet, that's where the paint is going to flow, you see? And if you allow it to flow, which is, again, sounds super simple, but easier said than done when you're in the heart of a painting. But if you can remember to let it flow, and you do this a couple of times, you'd be amazed at the different effects you're going to get, and how, if you want to get a gradated wash, for example, of a sky, one way of doing it would be to mix the color and then add some water to the mix and make it more watery, add more water, and as you move down, ultimately it's just water. But there is a way around it. You don't even have to work this hard. If you just place water down on the surface and then put the paint down and just let gravity do its thing, you can get a very similar effect, okay? Now, how good of a result you're gonna get, that will depend on your level of control of the medium and a lot of different factors, but generally speaking, there's a way to let watercolor do the work for you, okay? Now, let's look at another example. One thing I'm often asked about is, if I do want some accuracy, how do I do this? Because when I do wet and wet, it all gets really confused and messy. Well, you do have control. So if you have a shape that goes something like this, maybe it's a little piece of foliage, right? And you only want, super messy, and you only want the top of that tree or whatever that is to flow. Well, you get to decide what you wet. So I can wet areas around the edge that I want to flow. And if I do want to maintain flow, I can wet inside the trunk. And then maybe I'll use a bit of yellow. Everything that's up top is, in fact, going to flow. But the trunk, even if you let it just kind of flow down, that's where it is quite contained, right? And you see a lot of painters at the top of their game. Someone like Mark Foley comes to mind. He's really good at just mapping out an area and then constantly adding and injecting and creating interesting color combinations that just look so juicy and interesting. He's a master of that. So that's another way of doing it, that it's more controlled. Remember, you have control over where the paint is going to flow, which is within the areas that we've pre-wetted, and where it's going to just stay as it is, okay? One more way of approaching this is just, the good old normal wet and wet, where you pre-wet an entire area and then you can kind of sculpt the shape you want out of the paint while it's still wet, right? And the more thicker paint you're going to charge in, the darker it's going to get, of course, and the less flow you'll get. This opens up a door for a very nice effect, and that happens when you wet the paper and it's actually starting to get a little dry, and then you come back with very, very thick paint, like much thicker than what you have on paper, and you get a shape that will last a little more, you see? And that's how these painters do. I don't know if you've seen these, like a cat's tail that you just achieve with one brush stroke, and it looks like the fuzz of the cat's fur, you know? And if you just wait a little longer, I don't think these are viable for that anymore, but if you wait a little longer, you get that magical timing where the shape you put down will stay even more, but just the edges are going to get fuzzy, and that's how you create beautiful effects like clouds and so on. So let me show you, and you maintain your control, by the way. You wait for just the right timing. This is actually too early, but I think if you look at the section up top here, and let me show you, I haven't even shown you the sheen, right? This is more of the right timing. So let's see if we can just get the right timing once. This is where it's starting to dry. You see, that's a little better. And you have a lot of control, but you're guaranteed, this is still too wet, right? But you're guaranteed you're gonna get a very loosened edge, okay? So you can essentially, you do a blur effect, like you open a photo in Photoshop and you blur it out. You can do a blurry effect on whatever shape you're painting by coming back with very thick paint to a wash that's starting to dry, and the sheen looks something like what you see here. Okay, I had another point about that, maybe I'll remember it later on. But here's the thing. When it is actually time to make a painting, to work on something final, to paint something, not just practice technique, that's where a lot of people get lost. So I just want to show you how this wetness and flow can be used in a very in a varied manner depending on what you are working. So if you have this kind of a skyscape that I painted not that long ago here on the channel, right? This makes a lot of use of wet and wet. We pre-wet and we work it and work it, right? And the only areas that aren't making use of this are the boats. So it's okay to have a small section that is not making use of this and a large section that does, or vice versa. So let me show you another example. Here's a painting I did of our neighborhood. I actually shared it on social media, but not here on YouTube, just as a post, not as a process. And against the light, something really cool happened where everything became blue. I don't know why. That's the first time I'm noticing this strange phenomenon. I know in the distance things get blue with against the light and atmospheric perspective, but this tree got blue somehow. And I loved that and I really wanted to capture that. But my point is, I'm using that same loose wet and wet technique, but in select spots. So this is the other way around from the previous example, because here it's pretty organized and, you know, sharp edges, but I have used it here for the sky. I have used it here for the grass and all of these little details, right? I have used it here in the shadows. I have used it in touches here and there when things were still wet. So the thing is, you're not bound by any rules. You can paint something like this that's a little, you want it to be a little tighter, a little more controlled. You can definitely paint it your way and just work small sections without any of these, you know, really, it's a shame I still haven't progressed on this one, but without any of these, you know, large areas of wet and wet. You can work really, really controlled in all of it. And then you can have a painting like this that's a bit crazier. I tried to capture the sense of speed. Hopefully I did a good job here, but it's a big mess, like a nighttime highway scene type of thing. And that's just all over the place, right? And it's mostly alla prima. So the idea is there is a fact here, there is a truth. Watercolor rewards wetness. It's the one thing that makes it more unique. It's the one thing that makes it special. Look at these beautiful effects here, right? This is impossible to create in a controlled environment, unless you're using machinery, I suppose, and you're experimenting. But as a human being who does this on his own, this is impossible to create when you're trying to control the paint. This kind of an effect only is born out of letting the nature do its thing, basically, right? So you can decide that this way of painting doesn't suit whatever it is you're painting, right? Or you can decide to utilize it in select spots or to utilize it for the majority of the painting. My point is this: just remembering that this is a huge, unique tool in your arsenal will do you really good. So the next time you paint, approach it however you will, but maybe you'll get a thought of, flow. Can I utilize flow here? Even if I initially had a bit of a different idea of what I want to paint, perhaps flow could serve it better than my original idea. Even though I was sure I'm going to need tight details for my focal point, I was sure I'm going to need, maybe if you let it flow, something good will come out of it. And it's in that experimentation and spontaneous discovery where I think really breakthroughs happen in watercolor. So I hope that gives you something to chew on. If you are interested in taking your watercolors to the next level, I'm going to put a link down below to the frustration-free watercolor course. If you still haven't enrolled, I have about 300,000 subscribers, by the way. Thank you so much, and a couple of thousands in my course. So there is a lot of people I know who are watching and haven't checked it out. Check it out. There's also the Watercolor Realism course if you're a little ambulance, if you are a little more advanced. And then lastly, if you've gone through my courses and you feel like you need specific critique for your own very personal paintings, meaning I look at them, I tell you exactly what I think could be better, what doesn't work, what does work, where maybe you're making decisions out of lack of knowledge and understanding. I always encourage my students to develop freedom. So it's always like, if you're doing this, you can ask those who have already gone through this critique session. If you're doing it on purpose, perfect, I'm all for it. But notice that you might be doing it because you missed it or you just don't know how to do it a different way. So I'm all about choice, right? You make your own choices, but at least you know you have choices. So if you want to, shave years off your learning curve and get the actual results you deserve with watercolor, finally break free and enjoy this video, because this is just the most fun video. It has a total grip on me, and I would love for everyone to experience it the same way. If you want to get there, check out the watercolor critique session. I will put a link to everything in the description box. Also, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon. I really, really appreciate it. Check it out. There was a recent exclusive post. I'm giving you some pointers about the first wash of a painting and a bunch of exclusive processes for you to check out. If you head over there, I'm going to put a link again in the description box to my Patreon. If you head over there, you're going to be able to select a tier. It doesn't matter what tier you select. All of them give you right now, as of right now, equal access to everything, to the processes, and to receiving credits at the end of the video. So I'd really appreciate it if you check that out. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care.